I firstly want to say I'm just so appreciative of this opportunity because it's so important. It's probably the number one unaddressed need for people affected by cancer. And the fact that so many people showed up here, first of all, hats off to each and every one of you, because in some sense, you're desensitizing yourself to this topic. The fact that you're willing to learn, the fact that you're willing to discuss this, think about this, you actually get stronger in terms of anxiety and fear of recurrence and so on. So it's not like I'm going to prime your fears will get worse. In fact, it's just the opposite. You want to kind of lean into this. So, and I'm excited because there is some science now to show that you can actually make a difference in your perception and your health and so on. And just so big picture is I'm super excited to offer this, and you guys can make a huge difference in your lives as we go forward here. So take home points. The first big one is that anxiety is normal. Our goal here is to not make you, it's not to make you anxiety free, because I just don't think that's possible. I think, to imagine that you're going to be like perfectly happy, perfectly calm, perfectly at peace all the time is just unrealistic. It's more like we are going to have anxiety. This is a normal thing. This is what we humans do when we're faced with uncertainty. And so the idea then is to harness some of that energy so you can empower yourself, or at least 10% happier, 10% better, or you work on it, you get stronger as the months and years go by. So I'm trying to normalize this. A lot of people go through the fear of recurrence. And then, biggest picture is to understand. It's the power of understanding and seeing clearly what is it that you can control, what is it that you can't control, and then to let go of the things you can't control, and you focus your life energy into the things that are most important to you. And lastly, just as I say, by doing this work, by considering these issues, you really can lessen your anxiety, which will then result in your being physically, emotionally happier, stronger. So that's the kind of goal here. And it's certainly possible to keep getting stronger as you go along. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover. I've been listening to YouTube talks from different experts. I'm really happy I live in that society where I can learn these amazing things and be able to translate that hopefully into knowledge and practice and skills that each and every one of you can use. So this is what we're going to talk about tonight. In a couple, or I guess next week, we're going to talk about mental health. So I'll be kind of expanding on that topic fully. So again, I'm putting this within the context of what I call complete cancer care, or integrative oncology, which is the marriage of getting the best care from the medical system. And in fact, that's an important piece in terms of minimizing or decreasing your fear of recurrence, right? Is to actually tap into, understand what your physician's talking about. But I list these other things that actually have an influence on how your brain works. And I'm also having you think about the kind of spiritual perspective. And it was funny because my wife and I are practicing the Course in Miracles. So every morning we listen to a lesson, and we started on day one on January 1st. And it's lesson 41. God goes with me wherever I go. Now, I'm not trying to be religious or push my philosophy here, but I would suggest that if you do have a kind of faith-based tradition that is helpful, that brings you home to that kind of deep sense of peace and connection, then we need to remember that. And I've just had so many experiences in the cancer clinic where it's almost like people leave their spirituality at the door. They come in and they think about it from a kind of physical perspective. And at one point in time, I was asking people, I would say something like, are you comfortable talking about your religion or spirituality? And it was then a few people, when they heard that question, you could almost see their whole body go, oh yeah, I remember that. That's what's most important. Coming home to that kind of sense of peace. So it's a source of strength and groundedness for you. And if you're not kind of from a kind of religious perspective or faith-based perspective, even this idea that there's kind of an observer consciousness, like that part of you that's been with you your entire life, that's been able to observe your life, from the time you were 5 to 15 to 25, at each moment in your life, there's this kind of consciousness that watches your life. And I would argue with you that the kind of characteristics of that consciousness, it's very peaceful. It's very, it's like an energized, peaceful feeling. And it's as if you can watch your life from that perspective. And even though you may feel anxious, your consciousness is not anxious. So it's as much as I'm going to talk about spirituality tonight, but the point is that there's something bigger that you can tap in to help you through your journey. Okay. And on that same theme, and we've done this with each of the talks now, for me, it's very important that I remember what's most important, because I can be like a victim of the circumstances, like getting blown by the wind this way or that, or I can remember deliberately how I want to be in this world. And so what I do is a ritual. We'll do a little meditation together right now, but I do a ritual at the start of the day. I'm like, please help me, please guide me, please help me be beneficial, help me be very loving. I'm like really praying hard, usually in kind of a secular way. So that's my intention. That's what I want to remember as I'm serving each and every person as I'm going forward. So setting that intention is very important. And especially going into difficult situations. How do I want to be in this circumstance? What do I hope in myself? So as ritual, going into difficult situations, or in the middle of chaos, coming back home to what's most important. And when you focus your energy there, certainly the kind of fear wiring, the stress wiring, the overwhelming wiring settles down, and you become more centered and at peace. So it's almost like as if you're training yourself to be the best version of yourself as the days and weeks and months are going on. You're getting stronger at coming back home to what's most important to you. So on that theme, let's assume a strong posture. We'll do the heart coherence technique again. And one of the ideas is to have about 5 breaths per minute, which means therefore, the breath has to last about 12 seconds. And yes, you don't have to breathe at exactly that rate. Do it at a rate that feels good for you. And part of this for me is to prime the relaxation part of your nervous system. It's better to have the longer, slower, smoother out breath. The longer, slower, smoother out breath. And so we're going to focus on our breath first. Then I'm going to ask you to bring your consciousness to your heart. And lastly, generate that sense of joy and calm and peace there. So let's start with simply coming home to a sense of mindfulness to breath. What does it feel like to breathe? Sense of grounded in your body. Now let's exaggerate the length of the breath. So maybe you're breathing in for a count of 3 and you're breathing out for a count of 6. So nice, slow, smooth out breath. Very nice. Real sense of peace. So you have to breathe in slightly deeper for a count of 3 or 4. And nice, slow, peaceful out breath, count of 6 or 8. Allow yourself to drop, relax, going out slowly. And bring your consciousness or your attention into the middle of your chest as you're doing this. Real sense of gratitude for your heart. Nice, slow, smooth out breath. Ah, very nice. And lastly, allow yourself to experience a sense of caring or compassion at the level of the heart. Joy, peace, gratitude, compassion, whatever it is, allow your heart to experience that. Allow your heart to open. Beautiful. Bringing your attention back to sense of being connected with the floor, back in your body. Just going to ring the chimes now. And coming back home to listening to the lecture. I think it's really important, right, to remember to come back home to whatever is of greatest value. You want to manifest that more within your life. You're focusing there. You focus there so much. It's harder for the fear thoughts to come through. It's harder to feel anxious when there's a purpose, a deep sense, connection. Okay. Anxiety is normal, right? This is what happens to us human beings, and especially around a cancer diagnosis. You know, we don't expect cancers to happen to us, or it's rare for us to have that expectation. And the stress of decision making, you know, questioning, like, who am I? And also the elements of grief and loss, those are normal, natural things. So you're going through this kind of turmoil typically. And anxiety is a natural product of not knowing what's going to happen. So that's, you know, it's expected. Almost everybody will be anxious at diagnosis. And then the other one that often happens, I call it the end of treatment meltdown. And so many people describe this, like, you know, you get your treatment, maybe you go through chemotherapy, and then suddenly you're released back into your normal life. You're not seeing the medical practitioners as much. And so it's harder to kind of reintegrate in terms of what's your new role, you know, your new health. How do you, I mean, your priorities can change, et cetera, et cetera. So again, the transitions are often anxious times. And lastly, you know, fear, if you want to define it, like I'll give you the example. Fear is in some sense a reaction, kind of to a threat. So maybe you're on your phone and you're texting and you accidentally kind of walk into the street and you almost get hit by a car. You know, in that moment where you kind of wake up and go, oh, I almost got hit by a car, you get a fear reaction. So the adrenaline pours through you. It's, you know, you would have jumped away from the car, but it's that kind of fear reaction that wakes you up to basically say, pay attention to the circumstance so that you don't do that again. So the fear reaction has an evolutionary effect, of evolutionary goal or cause. So you're adding fear to, like, fear around the cancer diagnosis, what's going to happen in the future, to uncertainty leads to this sense of anxiety, partly because the frontal lobe is going through the possible things that could happen in the future. So it's, again, it's from an evolutionary perspective, you're visualizing what might happen in the future. And that's the power of the frontal lobe, is to go through those hypothetical situations. What would I do then? Is there something preventative I can do, et cetera, et cetera? And when the frontal lobe kind of looks into the future and you don't know what's going to happen, there's that sense of uncertainty, and the frontal lobe feels anxious, and then the kind of worrying feeling happens, and that's the anxiety. And that's part of what we call fear of recurrence. So again, all normal, natural stuff. We don't have to fight against those natural instincts. We have to just work with them. Okay, so I'm going to call fear of recurrence, sometimes you'll see it as FCR, and it's defined as the fear, worry, or concern relating to the possibility that the cancer could come back or the cancer could progress or get worse. So it's both situations, both the kind of curative situation, or if you're in one of those situations where you're not going to be cured of your cancer, then it's the fear of recurrence on that side. You're going to have some fear of recurrence. It's like, it's going to happen, and we're not aiming for zero. We're aiming for a healthy amount. And it varies right from kind of concern about what might happen to kind of debilitating anxiety. And so we want to be able to work with wherever is happening there. It really can happen at any point after the diagnosis. Sometimes people put on the brave face as they're going through their treatment. You know, they get through all their treatment and they kind of have their post-treatment meltdown, and that's where kind of some of the anxieties can come through. Again, normal, natural. And it's just not one thing. It's just not like one thought or one feeling. It's very multidimensional. It affects how we think, how we feel, and we often have some type of coping reaction to it. So that's also part of the fear of recurrence. And I'm going to kind of flush this out a little bit further here. So one of the researchers is a psychologist from the University of Ottawa. She's actually kind of world expert, Sophie Lebel. So I'm using some of her work. There are other experts here I've listened to, but essentially we're going to have some fear all the time, from kind of a normal concern all the way up to kind of a crisis mode. So, and that can fluctuate as our emotions almost always do. There's a fluctuation over time. One woman wrote, fear of recurrence, it's like a whale that moves into your living room. Over time, the whale gets smaller, but never quite goes away completely. A tenant you can't get quite rid of. Maybe it gets down to the size of a magazine rack. Once in a while, you bump into it, and sometimes it swells up into your face again, like when you have a mammogram and they call you back for extra views. So I like that metaphor because it acknowledges that those concerns, those anxieties are going to be with us. And hopefully we can keep them most of the time down to the size of the magazine rack, but to recognize there can be some blowing up times as well. It's kind of coming and going, kind of coming in a little bit of waves or occasionally. And typically it becomes less prominent as the years go by, but it still can flare at times. So I like the metaphor because it's very human and very real and very normal. Lots of features. So it's not just like one thing. So people can feel alone, and hats off to all you guys for being part of Wellspring and joining this webinar. So you can feel alone with the fear of recurrence, but it really kind of centers in this idea of somehow believing or getting this kind of false impression, like I know this cancer is going to recur, feeling and experiencing that uncertainty, having thoughts, like kind of repeated thoughts that are difficult to control. You're having thoughts and imagery that keep coming. Oftentimes they can be daily and progressive. And it's not like they're just flaring a little bit, but they can flare a lot. So, and it can worsen with time. We experience distress, and it ultimately affects our functioning. And that, I think that's the kind of crossing point for me, is when you're really kind of not enjoying your life and you're not doing the things you love to do. There can be kind of suicidal thoughts or death thoughts. So these are all possible features of fear of recurrence. Okay, so then when it crosses over into this is really affecting your life, it can happen in lots of different ways. So this kind of ongoing intrusive thoughts that kind of clogging your brain and not allowing you to think other thoughts. The maladaptive coping, could be excessive, internet. It could be, alcohol, drugs. It could be, harassing your medical team nonstop for reassurance. It can be just an excessive feeling, like just feeling overwhelmed and awful. Could be so kind of overwhelmed here that you're not able to plan for the future. And then the functional impairments, if you can't kind of do your thing on the day-to-day that you would usually do in the circumstance, that also is the kind of crossing point to say, geez, you probably really need a professional at that point in time. Okay, so how common is fear of recurrence? So almost everybody would have this feeling for certain at diagnosis, right? It would be consuming time, and it's appropriate. You want to kind of understand what's happening and so on. But if you survey people who've had a cancer diagnosis, the different surveys say it's between 22 and 74%. So about half of people at any point in time are going to kind of explain and say, yeah, this is still with me. About 50% will be moderate or high, and even 70% if you're amongst the vulnerable people here. Now, I'll talk about the vulnerable populations. 7%, like 1 in 16 people, this will really affect how they live their life. So again, that's pretty common. And so we need to address that. I think it's really important. Often quoted as the #1 unmet need of people affected by cancer. So, and healthcare professionals are also struggle with trying to empower people around this issue. But I think the clear viewing, I'm hoping this presentation will give you the clear view to see what you can do, what you can let go, what you recognize as normal, when you know you need some help. So risk factors for it. So who are the people that are more likely to be continuing to suffer this kind of sense of fear and worry? People who have a greater perceived threat. So, the example was maybe a woman had early breast cancer, and her team told her it was about an 85% chance of being great in the long term. And yet, even though she understands that rationally, that she's got a very, very high chance of cure, that she believes that her cancer is going to come back. So she has a greater perceived risk than is actually in the circumstance. If he or she believes that they're not going to be able to cope with the issues in the future, that also puts them at a higher risk of feeling this on an ongoing basis. Or lower optimism would be another way to express that one. If they're the type of person who's always needing some reassurance from the medical system, the nurses, et cetera, again, that's more like a behavior that reflects the underlying fear. It seems that men and women are actually quite similar. I mean, it seems maybe the breast cancer women have higher fear of recurrence than the prostate cancer men, but prostate cancer could be a slower growing cancer. There's lots of reasons, but the other types of cancer, it seems very similar in terms of if you really do the surveys and dig down. Younger people are at greater risk. If you have ongoing physical symptoms, so for instance, if you have side effects and you're getting aches or really bad fatigue or those type of issues, then that also puts you at risk of worrying that the cancer could be coming back. And so if your quality of life is poor, you're more likely to kind of attribute that to the fear of recurrence. Lower education, socioeconomic status. I just feel like if you can educate yourself and kind of understand this from a bigger picture, then you're less likely to hold on to the unnecessary fears. So that's, again, it argues that what you guys are doing right now is going to help you ultimately. And then the kind of the social support, social stressors, et cetera, when you don't feel like you've got a good team in one way or other, whether it's, feeling isolated or otherwise, then it also can get that those thoughts can get displaced to the fear perspective. So then I'd ask each and every one of you, because we do have, and again, it's okay to think about this, not like you're causing more fear or recurrence. What is it that makes you feel, oh, I'm worried about that possibility? And it can be just, kind of on your day-to-day, the thought comes to your mind, oh, my cancer is going to come back. Could be like the thought that suddenly perturbs the feeling and can push you into that kind of cycle. So the thought by itself, oftentimes the thoughts are also perturbed by bodily sensations. So if you have an unexplained symptom, maybe your arthritis is acting up a little bit, you're having side effects from treatments, it's like the brain is trying to justify what's happening there. And so that can be a kind of a trigger to say, oh, maybe it's cancer. Or a lot of people will say that on the anniversary of when I was diagnosed, and when I was just diagnosed around Halloween, for instance, every Halloween, I'm feeling more anxious about this. Or I had to undergo my big surgery on January the 4th. Every New Year's, I'm feeling anxious. So again, the event can be the thing that triggers the sudden stress reaction or fear reaction. Most everybody will have some fear of recurrence with those medical visits, right? So that's the norm, like going in to talk to your oncologist, even if it's for a routine visit or getting some scan results or screening test results, is the prime for the fear. And then the other thing that can happen is if you hear about friends or family or famous people who are getting your type of cancer or dying of your type of cancer, again, it can be like, if it happened to them, it's going to happen to me type feeling. So again, being able to see this clearly is a very important first step in understanding what's your makeup, what's your physiology. Okay, there's the pattern around what they call scanxiety, which is the anxiety leading up to a scan or hearing the results of that scan, right? So that's Again, this is normal. This is what we humans do when we're in these circumstances. Most people, and I heard it from one of my pediatric patients, their parents saying it's about a week before the scan that I start to feel anxious, and it starts to peak up until the time of the scan. And it stays there until I hear the good news afterwards. So typically, hopefully, you would get the good results, and then with the good results, it's like, whew, and you kind of can make a pretty quick return, within a day or so back to yourself again. And then typically that same pattern would happen 3 months later, 6 months later, or a year later, right? So it's normal. This is what happens. And, don't feel alone in kind of going through that each time. There are some people that have a higher degree of anxiety, and they ruminate a bit more for the month coming up to the scan, so they can feel more anxious for even a good month, and then they don't settle quite as fast, so they stay a bit more anxious, and it can last for a longer period of time. So those are the people that are primed on the kind of anxious side of it to kind of hang on to those feelings of anxiety. Luckily, and this is the kind of guts of this presentation now, you can actually do something to help yourself. You can actually work with this in a way that reduces the anxiety and empowers yourself. And you can also get better care and be healthier because of all these things. You're letting this anxiety help you get stronger. So there are proven strategies and techniques, and we're going to work on this a little bit in terms of how our thoughts can get distorted, and how to reframe that with kindness and wisdom. Mindfulness is actually a key piece. Again, for me, it's almost like that meta consciousness, or the observer consciousness that can watch what you think, watch what you feel, watch what you do, and just be able to identify those patterns so that that you can kind of intervene earlier. What you don't want is to get yourself so wound up with anxiety and thoughts and worries and kind of trapped in that loop, because it's harder to bring yourself down. It's much easier to be able to identify, oh, that's what I'm doing right now. Okay, this is my pattern. Okay, so let's work with this pattern. And the earlier you pick it up, the easier it is to kind of settle this down. Acceptance and commitment therapy, I think I'll go over next week, but this idea to come to grips with the reality and also set your intention for a healthier, happier you. And lastly, I'd say, seeing the therapist, or even, joining a group or doing the work of addressing your fears directly, I think is really important, because that really takes the power out of them. Okay, here's the medical system part of this. You need to, I suggest, is you become the expert at your disease. So even though it's a bit scary to talk about these things, by becoming the expert, you can see the picture more clearly. You get a much more realistic perspective. And then you also feel like nothing is hidden. Then you kind of know everything that you need to know. And so I'd ask your doctor, if you're going for cure and you've had those treatments, the first question is, what are the chances that my cancer will come back? Or if you're in the incurable situation, but you're kind of on hold here, like, how long do you expect me to live, or how long it's going to be before you think the cancer is going to come back, right? So again, just a very clear thinking, pragmatic perspective. Even though it's a difficult conversation, at least you then know, and you don't have to make up stories and create unnecessary fears. So that's the pattern. So for instance, in breast cancer, if you get through the first 3, 4, 5 years, then your chance of cure keeps getting very high, very quickly. So even out to 10 years, yes, there's a tiny chance of recurrence, but then if you're out at the 10-year point, you say, geez, I got a 99% chance of cure now, or whatever that number is for you, for instance. So by understanding that, then you can actually see the truth of the situation. This is a big one we're going to go over in a separate slide. How would it come back if it comes back? What are the symptoms? What do I need to look for? Again, pragmatic, clear thinking. Is there anything I can do to reduce the risk? And we've been talking about that a little bit from the last lecture in terms of complete cancer care. And so if you're doing everything you can do within a balanced way that works for you and it keeps you happy, then there's no regrets. Like, you don't have to fuss or worry about trying to do something extra. You've figured this out, you're doing what you can do, and they can kind of let go let go of the worry. And then that's the kind of biggest point, is letting go of the things you can't control and just coming to a sense of peace. I'm doing what I can do, nothing out. It's not worth worrying. The worrying is not helping me address the circumstance. The worrying is detracting from the quality of my life. So why don't I let go of the worry? That's the mind game that can help get you there. Okay, so the reason why you want to understand how you might have signs of recurrence is that you can stop worrying about other symptoms that aren't related to cancer. So for instance, if you get a flu and you get some or a cold and you get some swollen nodes in your neck, you can understand, well, I just have a cold. I don't have to believe that that's cancer. Or if I have some diarrhea, ate something bad, I know that's not necessarily cancer. Or my arthritis has flared up again. That's not necessarily cancer. You're being smart about what to worry about and what not to worry about, because life is going to go on. You're going to have other issues going forwards. So in the breast cancer example, so I think about, for instance, a cancer spread to bone. It would be a pain that gets worse and worse and worse. It's like a progressive worsening over weeks, and it becomes more and more severe time. So constant, severe, progressive would be the description of that pain. So the aches that come and go just don't sound like cancer and just turn out almost always not to be cancer. So the other one is, if you found a lump in your breast, like a little pea that gets harder and grows, or in your armpit, for instance, a worsening rash on the skin, like a thickened rash on the skin, or debilitating fatigue. Those would be the symptoms that, oh, geez, you got to get in to see your physician. But the flus and colds and arthritis aren't. And so you can be less worry in your life if you understood that. Okay. I'm going to go on to this next perspective, is that we can hack into our brain and live in a more peaceful and calm life. And so the first thing I want to show you is the hand model of the brain. So you see that there. And through evolution, the evolutionary process is the first level of the brain is the base of the thumb, which is the reptilian brain, the fight or flight, withdraw from danger part of the brain. And the next part of the nervous system that was developed through evolution is represented by the end of the thumb. It's the limbic system, the irritable brain, the reward-seeking system. And then layered on top of that is their youngest and probably weakest part of the brain, which is the frontal lobe. And that's your best self. You want to try to live in the frontal lobe more often. It has emotional regulation, it's attention, it's making good decisions, it's the compassion, the connected brain. This is where you want to live as much as possible, right? So that's and it kind of goes back and forth, which is the next slide here. So we want to live in the frontal lobe and have less of the fear reaction driving our thoughts and behaviors. We want to live from the frontal lobe side of things. So all day long, we're like a little bit stressed, upset. We kind of flip out and we get kind of more irritated, stressed, etc. And then we come back home again. We get more calm, relaxed. Parasympathetic part of the nervous system is working, and it kind of goes back and forth. And the more that you can stay living in your frontal lobe, the happier you'll be, the better it'll be for your body, the more you'll enjoy your life. It's as simple as that. And so you want to practice that. And so how is it that you can spend more time here? And obviously two ways to do that. One is set up the conditions such that your frontal lobe is more likely to be online. So you're going to take care of yourself in such a way that your brain works better and your frontal lobe is working better more often. Or when you recognize stressed, coming back home again. So those are the two parts of it. So the first thing is to create the conditions in which your brain is working best. And we just talked about it before the recording. Exercise is probably number one. You thicken that prefrontal lobe. It gives you more energy, quality of life. It's good for your brain. Your brain learns and grows after exercise. We're going to talk about diet next week, but the idea is the low glycemic diet, meaning that the glucose level doesn't get too high or too low, allows the frontal lobe to work better. and that you want to feed your brain with brain food, brain healthy food. And so there's a way to do that, and we'll cover that in the mental health lecture next week. Sleeping, napping, extremely important. It's one of the foundational pieces of trying to allow your brain to think more clearly and function better. So we'll also talk about that next week. And lastly, practicing a relaxation technique, again, thickens this part of the frontal lobe, the kind of balance between the kind of negative emotions or depressive emotions and the positive emotions, the right side versus the left side. As you practice relaxation meditation, you get better, stronger. It also, you can see that the frontal lobe overlies the limbic system. So it dampens down, it helps with emotional regulation. So that's, again, practicing a relaxation technique puts you in that space of mind. And I think about it, you develop a sense of resilience. You're much less likely to get primed or pulled into the kind of stress reaction. And by practicing relaxation meditation, you develop the mindfulness to be able to watch yourself get wound up and to settle down more quickly. So again, creating the conditions for calm so you're resilient and can return to that state more easily and more positively. I would say if your life is filled with a sense of joy as well, it's almost as if you want to live your life in a way that you feel connected, you feel that sense of joy, that sense of compassion. And when you live there more often, you're less likely to kind of allow the kind of reptilian brain, the worry system to kind of take over. So again, it's like a true self-love when you take care of yourself that way. So for instance, by getting into nature is one way that you nourish your soul. Lastly, I'm talking about this from an individual's perspective, but touch, the kind of oxytocin of touch, or petting a pet, social connection, that hug, they're all healing and help the brain return to, I'm taken care of, I'm part of my tribe. And again, it builds a resilience. You're more social when you do those things. Okay. The other part of it, and therefore, is, so those are the things that kind of engages or empowers the frontal lobe, but you can also cause yourself unnecessary distress, unnecessary fear and anxiety. I was listening to the World at 6 on CBC radio tonight, and I'd like, I can only listen to that for about 3 minutes tonight, because I'm like, I'm gonna get myself wound up. I got a big lecture tonight. I don't want to go there. I don't want to feel anxious unnecessarily. So even though I want to know what's happening within the world, it's like maybe every couple of days is all I need in terms of radio. And I don't watch TV because I'm too sensitive to the images there. So television news, I think, is distracting. Unnecessary, upsetting activities, like really try to choose things that are good for you and let go of the unnecessary stuff. Too much social media, right? That kind of scrolling is hard on the brain. You're getting like a little stress reaction when you're using that. Instead, social media can be used as a mechanism of connecting you with others, right? So use it in the proper way. Obviously, the different other things that can kind of stress you, including alcohol and smoking. Alcohol does not lead to good night's sleep, by the way. All right. So we bring ourselves into this space. And the second thing is to practice mindfulness. Mindfulness is a key piece of really recognizing when you're feeling stress, what's your pattern, and being able to settle yourself down. So we're going to go through that activity right now. And I'm just going to talk to you about an excellent book. So Judd Brewer is a psychiatrist, really figured out this kind of the anxiety loops, and he has a fantastic book there called Unwinding Anxiety. And part of what he's teaching is how our brains can get trapped into these kind of loops that get stronger and stronger and stronger with time. One of the loops that happens is to substitute in something that makes you feel better when you're feeling stressed. It's like eating ice cream or browsing the internet, right? And so if you feel stressed, you feel the kind of fear of recurrence happening, and then you kind of distract yourself with that. That's going to be your go-to thing, and you'll never kind of address the underlying feeling. And yes, it's okay to distract yourself sometime, but obviously what I'm suggesting is just to stay with it, not run away from those bad feelings. Instead, you can just simply watch it and you desensitize it. You depower it when you do that. The other thing that happens is it can actually be a negative loop of the stressful thought leading to anxiety, which causes a kind of shutdown, avoidance, worry. And it's a repeating loop that you just go from I'm worried about that happening, and then, or that thought about that happening, into a worry cycle, and getting trapped and paralyzed in that feeling. And so it leads to avoidance. One of the key points is we don't want you to avoid your medical care, for instance. So that would be an example from this situation where you get so anxious that you don't want to have your mammogram, you don't want to go see your doctor, you don't want to see other people because they may talk about how you're doing, and that will make you think about your cancer, right? So it's like the thoughts, the worries can lead to a kind of withdrawal, and your world can get very narrow in that sense, and you get trapped into the anxiety loop. Okay, so Judd's teaching was that we can't rely on self-control or willpower, because sometimes we are going to be tired. Sometimes our frontal lobe is going to be offline. So we actually have to be able to watch what's happening, because the solution starts with that kind of mindfulness piece. We're watching what the triggers are. Like what is it that primes you to feel that way? And what is it that you do in those circumstances as the point? And instead of kind of giving in and going away on the worry or on the avoidant behavior, you become very curious. What does that feel like? And the curiosity by itself can be the better one. The brain gets kind of interested in the curious feeling. So that's one of the tricks, is to simply stay with it, watch the wave of anxiety coming up, going down. Just be very curious as to the sensations, feelings, thoughts, what's going on with you. And as you watch that happening, you're actually in your frontal lobe already. You're in that meta-consciousness part of it. Okay, what do you do when you feel or suddenly anxious? How about this? What do you do when you're 45 minutes into the talk and everyone needs to stretch? I say stand up. So, and I'm going to let my cat out the door over here. I'm hearing some scratching here. So everybody can stand and just stretch and look away from the computer screen. Yeah. Look upwards and away from all that. Stretching up, 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 up. And shaking, a little bit of shaking, like shake it out, kick out your legs, maybe a little hula hoop in the other direction, whatever feels good for you. Rubbing your tummy. That's nice too, eh? Just kind of self-soothe. Rubbing your chest. Very nice, very nice. Wonderful, thank you. So cat's not scratching. All right, come on down. So far, I've been arguing, outlining how it is that you make yourself resilient, how it is that you can stay in your frontal lobe more often and feel more peaceful. The world's going to offer you the same challenges, but you'll just be in a more centered, peaceful state. You'll make better decisions. You'll be happier. Your body will be stronger. So that's the setting up the conditions. The next thing that we're going to talk about is that we are going to flare, right? We are going to suddenly feel anxious, get those thoughts and feelings in our body. It's going to happen to us. And to have a bit of a plan is actually a good idea. So the recognition is the first piece to this, to be able to watch your body. So think about it when you last had that kind of, my cancer could come back. Okay, so if you stopped it like pressing the pause button on a video and you scanned your body for the symptoms, what would be the symptoms there? So a lot of people have the kind of stress reaction, pounding heart, bigger breathing, stuck breathing, the muscles can contract, which gives the different types of pain and muscle pain. The stomach, GI tract slows down, acidy stomach, get the jitters, sweaty palms, right? So those could be any of the physical symptoms. And then as we like, the flare and we disengage from the frontal lobe, the emotional pathways start to flare, right? And you can recognize your own emotional energies, right? For me, it's like an irritation, but it could be like seeing red, frustration, anger. It's the fear, anxiety that we're talking about, or could it come out as kind of a sadness, feeling like you're going to cry, or a dissociation, a kind of numbness can happen, right? Those are all things that happen from an emotional perspective. You're thinking, how you think. So as you go offline, the thinking capacity to have the kind of bigger perspective, creative perspective, more open to possibilities gets shut down, and you go into more, I'd say, primitive type of thinking. So can't think clearly, you get a little bit foggy, can get very narrow, fixated, or watching the pattern of the thinking can kind of go in loops, right? So a manic fast loop of the same ideas. And lastly, it's like the content. What is it you actually think? If you type this out of the magical computer program, everything you thought over a week, and then looked at the transcript, how would you know that you're in the middle of the anxiety? What is it that you say to yourself, or to, in some sense, to others? So it could be like the blame game, like pointing the finger, like that guy's an idiot, or I'm such an idiot, or this is totally unfair. If I'm finding myself swearing, I know that I'm suffering some anxiety. Or if I'm calling, a label to, like, it's a fixed label. That person's an idiot, for instance, would be a label on that person. So again, it's like I'm going along and I have that time. I go, oh, geez, did I just think that? That's pretty harsh, right? So I'm having that conversation because I'm able to watch my thinking as I'm going. Okay, so then what do you do when anxiety flares? I think the big perspective is to try different techniques, but to have a plan, because it's going to happen. This is what we humans do. And so you want to have a technique that you use so you don't have to kind of scramble and think about it. You're actually going to say, okay, I'm going to use this breathing technique first. Or I'm going to put a hand on the chest. You have a kind of a routine that you get better at and you use earlier in the plan. I like to kind of use the mindfulness. It's like watching, being very curious. What are the sensations in my body? What are the feelings? What are my thoughts? Right. As soon as I'm doing that, it's the meta consciousness. It's watching the action. So there's the mindfulness piece. If you can't talk yourself down, okay, I'm upset now. I can settle down. I can get through this. If you can't do that, then I'll teach you this breathing technique. You can also, it's actually interesting. This is what I call body up. It's pretend that you're relaxed. You can actually do this right now with me. Just slump backwards and kind of look downwards, maybe with your eyes a bit closed. You might even pretend that you're chewing gum. Doesn't much matter if you do that or not. But I tell you one thing, by simply doing that, that body is sending up, and you can sit up again. Your body is sending a signal up to your brain to say, there's no real danger here, because if there was a real danger here, I would not be doing this, for instance. So it's a body up technique to allow the relaxation side of the nervous system to come forward. You can also say, remember what it's like to feel good. Oh, I may be feeling nervous now, but I'm having supper with my kids, or I'm getting together with my friend. It's going to be really good to do that. So it's like remembering what it's like to feel good. It's like, I'm nervous now, but I know I'm getting together. It's going to be better later. Obviously, talking to somebody is important, right? Just set it up. I don't want you to correct me or offer me advice. I'm just going to tell you how I'm feeling. So you're setting up that conversation and just saying, I was feeling really anxious today. I was thinking about this anniversary, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so in fact, why don't we do this as a quick standing exercise? So you're imagining that you're suddenly in that anxious feeling, you have the fear of recurrence is kind of coming up. The first thing I want you to do is to press the pause button. As soon as you press the pause button, be very curious. Watch what's happening in your heart, your chest, your abdomen, in your head. Like watching the physical sensations within your body. As soon as you're there, you're actually up into your frontal lobe again. You can do this with me whether you're sitting or standing. Put your hands on your lower abdomen. And I want you to take 4 slow breaths. And remember how we did that longer, slower, smoother out breath during the relaxation bit? I want you to do that now. Bringing your mindfulness to the sensation. So you're letting go of the catastrophizing mind and all the thoughts that are causing anxiety, putting your attention into the breathing. You're sending the signal up to your brain, and then you talk to yourself. I can get through this. I've been through difficult situations before. Let's take this one step at a time. So it's like you've re-engaged your frontal lobe to some degree, and you talk to yourself. You get a wellspring, and it's the key word of the day, wellspring. You get a wellspring of positive emotions by practicing a relaxation technique. You put down the wiring to get stronger and stronger and stronger into the relaxation part of the nervous system. That gets strong. The fear pathways actually can start to lose their strength. Relaxation pathways get stronger. You do that by practicing. Even a few minutes at a time, the 1 minute, 2 minute, 5 breaths in a minute, you're getting stronger at tapping into that so that when you're anxious, you can remember that feeling more easily. You can tap into those neurons more easily. Okay, next section is like, so far we're kind of reverse engineered or biohacked into the relaxation pathways, but I like to actually go to the source of what's causing anxiety, which are your thoughts and perspective with time. So the Anne Coscarelli wrote this piece around some people can do very simple self-talk, and it's not for everybody. You can just try this to see if it works for you. So you're kind of getting into the kind of anxious feeling, starting to worry, and just like talking to yourself, I guess it's unlikely to be cancer, right? Or, I was screened 2 months ago and things were fine. I'll go back if I need be, or there are millions of cancer survivors that are doing well, and I'm one of them, right? So you can just a little self-talk, something that's compassionate, matches your personality is one possibility. This is from Sophie Labelle. So she's starting to point you towards this whole cognitive behavioral therapy. So the situation is you're going into a medical checkup, right? And if you rated your anxiety at that moment, kind of going in, it would be like 90%, you're on kind of high alert. And the thought that's coming into this, and we're going to talk about automatic thoughts slightly, is I can't do this. I'm not strong enough, right? And then you're starting to question it. Well, what's the evidence? I've coped so far before. I've had many positive medical checkups. So you're kind of like arguing with the automatic thought, using your rational mind. The realistic response is to say, to acknowledge this might be difficult, but I can do this like one step at a time, right? And if you do that, then typically the anxiety levels will settle. And you're also being realistic. It's just not a positive thinking in the circumstance. Okay, so let's flush out this through the bigger cognitive therapy, which basically says it's our thoughts that create the feelings. Like people who are depressed often say something to themselves like, I'm worthless. And just believing or thinking that thought causes a depression, right? And so if we can be more realistic, like each person has their intrinsic beauty and strength, which is actually true. If you thought that, believed that, and it's a true thought, then it would help negate the feelings of depression. So it's one way. I'm giving a quick example of reframing there. The issue is that when we're feeling stressed or those thoughts come up like, I'm worried my cancer is going to come back, we can often regress in terms of how we think about things. So it's like the all or nothing this is going to happen. This is the all or nothing thinking. Or the overgeneralization. You stub your toe first thing in the morning and then you say, well, today is going to be a terrible day. Or you're just dwelling on, somebody cut you off in traffic, but otherwise you had a really positive, lovely trip. And so you're kind of brooding over, the negative thing. So you're discounting the positives in your life, magnifying the negatives, essentially. So it's all this kind of overgeneralization. There's the jumping to conclusions. If this person does this, if I do this, I know that person is going to do that scenario. So like mind reading is another distortion. Emotional reasoning would be an example. Would be I'm feeling anxious about doing this interview. Therefore, I can't do the interview. Like I'm no good at interviews. So your emotions, your thoughts are trying to justify your emotions. You're just anxious about the interview. You don't have to generalize that to how you're actually going to do. The should statements are kind of like societal perspectives of how you should do or what should happen. And this often can be very restricting in terms of your capacity and so on. Labeling, solidifies, a person's an idiot, medical system sucks. It's like, it's 100% that way is a labeling, right? And so it doesn't actually consider the true nuance of the situation, nor that things can change, right? It's rare that we can actually label something and be completely correct about it. And then personalization is really like the me movie. Everything's about me. I'm causing this myself. It's a little kind of egocentric, but it can also be like blaming other people as well. So personalization. Okay, so let's just do a few examples. I want a few examples of how you can reframe around the fear of recurrence thoughts. So point is, the truth is you can change the way you think. You can let go of the thoughts that aren't helpful. You can change the underlying beliefs, because often it's the core beliefs and the thought patterns that are causing the distress. And that will change your perspective, how you see yourself and others in the world. And ultimately that leads you to feeling better, being more productive, more effective, and enjoying your life a lot better, right? So this is the power of reframing, cognitive behavioral therapy. And we use a 3-column technique. So the situation is just the kind of ground truth, the raw truth of the situation. Like I'm talking to you right now is the raw truth. What you think about this presentation is an interpretation. Anyway, so then there's the step 1 is being mindful of the automatic or distressful thought. Step 2 is trying to think about, if I think this way, what's actually happening? If I think this distorted thought, what's the result and how is it exaggerated? And then step 3 is actually the reframe of being realistic, being kind, compassionate, but seeing a bigger perspective and being encouraging of yourself. So it's easier just to kind of go through this. So for instance, you're booked in for a medical appointment, right? So that's a normal thing. You're going to be booked in for a medical appointment. On top of that, you're going to add an extra and unnecessary thought. And the thought is, I can't handle this. This is too much. This is never going to work out. My life is totally out of control. Right? So you can almost hear the exaggerated perspective there. Now you might believe that, but if you can't kind of recognize that your thinking can get distorted at times, you miss out on this whole activity. You have to be able to have some humility that sometimes we exaggerate, we distort in our own minds, and our thoughts aren't necessarily true. So we have to kind of acknowledge that. So if you can hear yourself talking that way, then you can start to work with it. So if I talk to myself that way, I would feel, deflated, upset, stressed, anxious, right? So those are the emotions that will give a stress reaction within my body, a little like adrenaline shot. The fact is, it's not helpful for me to talk this way to myself. In fact, it's detracting from my quality of life. And then lastly, how is it exaggerated or irrational? I can't handle this. Well, actually, I'm here right now. I'm breathing. I'm actually handling this. Like there's no kind of 100% handle or not. This is too much. Well, it's a lot. I don't know if it's too much or not. This is never going to work out. Is that true? mean, it could work out actually perfectly well. My life is totally out of control. Well, I feel a sense of control now, but it's not like 100% totally out of control, right? So it's like you're starting to say, okay, that's, I'm wound myself up here. And so then we work with the reframe, and it has three components. The acknowledgement, this is the kindness to say, yes, this is a tough moment. And then you look at the situation from a bigger perspective, and then you're encouraging to yourself. It's the wise and compassionate voice, like the grandmotherly voice in your head that's also wise. So here's an example. You say to yourself, oh, I'm going into this medical appointment, and I'm feeling stressed. Yeah? This is tough, but it doesn't help me to get myself all worked up. And I can take this one step at a time. I can get the best care possible. I can advocate for myself, and I can find the good in each moment, right? So it's this like, oh, okay, here's a different way of looking at this. You're still acknowledging that it's tough and a stressful, situation, but you're kind and you're seeing a bigger perspective. Okay, so that's example number one. Example number two, maybe hearing somebody has had a relapse of your particular type of cancer, maybe a famous person, for instance. So that's what has happened. And then you're going to add your thoughts on top of that will make the situation worse. You'll exaggerate it in some way or form. So if that person's cancer came back, it's going to happen to me too, right? So that would be the thought. And if you can kind of catch yourself thinking that way, that's the mindfulness piece of it, then you can actually start to think, if I think and believe this, what's going to actually happen? Well, what emotions come out of this? Obviously, it's the same deal around anxiety. The body can kind of get a stress reaction and feel worse. It's not helpful. And it is exaggerated in that the point is we don't know if your cancer is going to come back or not. That person had a relapse, but you don't know what's going to happen. That's just the truth of it, right? So just being very pragmatic. I don't know what's going to happen to me. So then how is it that we work with this? We're talking to ourselves, we're winding ourselves up. How is it that we can work with this? So you acknowledge, really see like this is tough. I'm stressed at this point in time. We see a bigger perspective, and then we're encouraging of ourselves. So it is scary, but I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Worrying is not going to help. And I can choose to live my best life, best possible way now, right? The power is right now. How do you want to live your life right now? And so that's where we put our focus. For instance, as an example in this one, each person can reframe in their own way. One of the Winnipeg social workers told me this one, the rule tool. When you're thinking about those thoughts, is it realistic, right? Is it useful to think that way? Because sometimes, you tell yourself these things and it's not actually serving you. Like, I'm going to be leaving, my husband behind or whatever. It's like, well, if you're going to think that way, is it going to actually make you feel better? Is it helping you cope better? So probably just kind of let go of that idea. Is even logical, right? If that person's cancer recurred, then mine's going to recur too. And what's the evidence? Like, is there some hard, think about it as a scientist. So it's another way to start questioning your thoughts and decreasing the power of the thinking. The last thing I'm going to talk about is probably the difficult one, which is right. And sometimes you want to go with the kind of professional around this, is being very pragmatic about this. Like, what is it that I'm really scared of? Like, what is the worst case scenario? And what's bad about that? And we do that on the Sunday mornings of a weekend retreat. And we ask that question, what scares you most? And why is it that scares you? And some people say, well, it's dying. Yeah. So when then you kind of flush that, is it the dying part, the suffering going into the physical death? Are you worried about the afterlife, for instance? Are you worried about being dependent on other people or being a burden? Or is it just like very sad? Like, you're not going to be there for your family, not to be able to experience, life in the same way, right? So it could be all of those things. As we look at it more clearly, one of the powers of this exercise is that it liberates our life force energy to live our life now, right? To live our life fully now, to connect with our loved ones, to honor ourselves, to take care of ourselves. So it's the other power of this. It decreases the fear. Oftentimes there are things you can do to help yourself address these things, like talking to your loved ones around this. The last thing I'm going to talk about is what I call the second arrow. And it's, what's your relationship towards your own anxiety? If your anxiety was one of your friends, we'd be like, I don't want to spend any time with that friend at all. Like, I like that. That's kind of my enemy. Are you fighting against your anxiety, right? Or you say, okay, that anxiety has its place. Or another way to say that is, are you seeing stress is toxic, should be avoided, reduced, and managed? So it's like pushing away, fighting against the reality that you are feeling stressed sometimes. So when you're anxious, say, you start to fight again. My life is toxic. This is too much. I'm not doing this right. I'm inadequate, right? So it's the fight. Or do you say, anxiety is a part of life. It should be accepted and utilized, embraced. It means that something important is at stake, right? So here's an opportunity to learn, opportunity to grow, opportunity to reframe, opportunity to reprioritize your life, right? So it's like, this is normal, natural stuff. So we can garner the power of our anxiety. Last few evidence-based tips now. One of the things you can do is to remember the occasions where you did successfully manage your uncertainty, right? So remember that you've been through difficult circumstances before and you got through it. Super important for me is that there's a sense of kindness towards ourselves. We're not going to be perfect all the time. We're going to have these difficult emotions. And being kind to ourselves allows us to grow and learn and get stronger much more easily than being harsh on ourselves. Using a mantra, right? So this idea, like an evidence-based tip, I'm doing the best that I can, could be a mantra that you use on the day-to-day. And this is kind of, again, a sense of kindness that we humans suffer and we can do the best that we can in the moment. And lastly, it's like, we're not going to get down to no anxiety. We just want the amount of anxiety that's right for our circumstance. Not too much, not too little, because if you're totally lackadaisical, you wouldn't be on this, watching this video now, nor taking care of yourself. So that's actually helping you in some ways. There's just an intervention. I just want to show you, you can probably see my mouse here. So some of the things they do in this 6-week course, guided imagery, exposing yourself to your worst fears, like writing down a worst case scenario, practicing mindfulness, body scan. There's all these activities and skills that you can actually practice and work on so that your fear of recurrence gets less, and you put it in perspective and you use it in a positive way. So I just wanted to show you that slide, that there's more to this than what I've showed on the presentation today. Quick plug for our book, The Healing Circle. It's the teachings from an entire weekend retreat, with every second chapter being the true stories of people who've attended the retreats. And a very inspirational book is what I've been told. You can go to our website, healingcancer.org, to order that. And that's it. Folks, thanks for listening to this. This is a super important topic, and I'm really glad you stuck with it, and you really can make a difference in your lives. So bless you all.